Now, speaking of something else that probably won't be sorted out in one simple, swift conversation, we move to one of my favourite topics when it comes to archaeology in the media, and that is Stonehenge.
Oh,
Stonehenge.
what's Stonehenge?
What is Stonehenge? Well, actually, apparently, Andy, there's only one Neolithic, actually, in fact, Bronze Age monument in all of Britain, and that is Stonehenge. There's no others. There's no others, Andy. Don't try and tell me about other
Well,
monuments.
actually, to be fair, I'm not a prehistorian, and I've heard of Stonehenge. So that, I mean, it must be important.
No. As ever, there's actually a very interesting article. In fact, it's actually a little blog post written in this instance in the Guardian about prehistoric food and the diet of people in and around the Avebury sort of area, the Salisbury Plain, this kind of thing. But of course, they can't help but say, what did Neolithic man eat after a hard day at Stonehenge? Sweet pork, rich cheese, this kind of thing. When actually the article, in fact, is actually really quite good because it references findings from Durrington walls, where there's all sorts of interesting archaeology that's been showing potentially a sort of a ritualized hunting, where animals are released into a circular enclosure and then picked off in a very sort of heightened hunting environment, as it were. So, hunting as theatre, I guess, and then feasting occurs afterwards. So there's some great information here, but they just have to sort of have to do the Spinal Tap. Nobody knows what people were doing exactly at Stonehenge, and it's such a shame, such a shame. But in addition to that, something that has also slightly annoyed people is the fact that, again, it's all about man. Neolithic man hunt together. Mm. It's such a shame because it's. I mean, I know people don't like the current year argument. It's 2017, and we're still presenting man hunt stone monument, Stonehenge. I don't know. What do you think?
I think it's the perils of a headline, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you mention Stonehenge in a headline, it gets higher ratings on Google than if you put Durrington Walls in. It's clickbait. Um, I mean, my favourite actually was the BBC, where their headline on this story was, and I think we have to. It goes with a new exhibition at the Stonehenge Heritage Centre. I think we have to say,
Hmm.
which are run by English Heritage. But the BBC's coverage was Stonehenge builders ate food from Scotland, and I immediately thought, oh, were they eating deep fried Mars bars? Allegedly. It,
See now you're trying to annoy me even more, just lumping the Scottish and the people in the north of England in with this sort of uncivilized way of eating. I mean, oh
I just think actually, and the reason I did that, what we're talking about here is, as you've just alluded to, we're talking about cultural stereotypes.
yes,
We have our modern cultural stereotypes, like the one I've just used, and we also have our historical and archaeological stereotypes, which people in our business have been trying to move away, or many of them have been trying to move away from for many years now. Whether it's the illustrations of Stone Age people in school textbooks where only the men are doing interesting stuff and the women are
mm-hmm.
all sat at home cooking,
mm, mm.
um, or whether or the kind of assumption that that you've just alluded to in this story. In fact, as you say, underneath it is some really interesting archaeology and some really interesting scientific analysis involving isotopes and the origins of some of those animals which appear to have come from what's now Scotland. So
Yeah.
were they driven down in droves, or were they put onto boats and brought down the coast to
Mm-hmm.
and then brought? There's lots of really interesting, meaty archaeological questions there, which we're just beginning to understand, and but we're being sidetracked perhaps by some lazy headline writing.
Well, but the problem is that we're not the ones who are being sidetracked, as it were. I'm just being irritated by this. What the problem is that there is a genuine opportunity here for the public at large to engage with, as you say, literally meaty topics. Where is this meat coming from? Why does the pig have to come from Scotland? Now, there are reasons that are probably going to become more and more clear in the next couple of decades, I guess, in terms of Neolithic archaeology and Bronze Age archaeology up in Scotland. But also as well, beyond that, you've got this question of milk, the use of cheese and also flavors like honey and this kind of thing, yogurt. And also, there's the opportunity here, ironically enough, to highlight the crucial work of in the hunter-gatherer dichotomy of gatherers, actually, and the fact that actually the people who would have been bringing most of the food in to these sorts of societies would have been actually, as it were, the women in particular. There's some very good, strong social and anthropological indicators that, for the most part, women do most of this work historically. There's also some very good examples in terms of the way that our brains work. Women are much better at picking things up and doing this kind of thing, whereas men are better at sort of hunt, kill. But then again, there are some men who, and this is where it gets quite interesting. Men who decide to go off doing gathering often have more successful relationships with the ladies, as it were, because they get to, goodness gracious me, they get to know women. They actually converse with them. That's shocking. They talk to them. But I suppose my point being is that here again we have a lazy headline that is undermining, in fact, the content of the story. And in particular, places like Durrington Walls, we have actually, in my opinion, a far more interesting site than Stonehenge. It's just that Stonehenge is wheeled out like the tired old penny for the guy.
Don't forget also, though, in the real world of archaeological realpolitik, Stonehenge, along with Dover Castle, is English heritage's biggest cash cow. So anything.
Well, in that case, does it need more advertising?
In a world when do you spend up north of north of 50 quid to take you and yours and to Stonehenge and buy the guidebook and eat in the cafe, or do you buy yourself a copy of Assassin's Creed Origins to play at home? We're in a competitive leisure environment these days, and anything you can do to put your your leisure opportunity to front and center, you'll take it, I think.
I suppose, and also actually for example, in both your story and also the article I'm looking at here, Feeding Stonehenge, the new exhibition at the English Heritage Visitor Centre is mentioned, and but I don't know. It just feels clumsy. It just feels like every single time this sort of comes clumping in with its muddy boots and just sort of leaves a great big footprint on my floor, and I'm like.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate for a minute. And again, I'm not speaking here as a prehistorian, but I think I'm right in saying that certainly the current model is that there is an association between the people who were living and feasting at Durrington Walls and Stonehenge as a monument, because within the landscape there are connections. It's argued that in what appears to be the religious theology, there's issues of stone and issues of timber and all that. It's controversial, but there are arguable connections there. So it's actually legitimate to say that there is a connection with Stonehenge and Durrington and. It's a watching brief. It's work in progress.
Yes, no, I know. I suppose like I say, it largely came to my attention because actually because of the food content as well. I mean, I particularly like it when an article does in fact highlight the breadth of food that people are eating.
Yes.
In the past, because there is a tendency to think of especially prehistoric diets as being somehow simple or maybe in fact actually unpalatable. And yes, actually there's a really lovely photograph here of all the food laid out in the shadow of Stonehenge, and you've got a really nice range of food. In fact, you've got fruits, berries, vegetables, mushrooms, pig, honey, actually yogurt there, cheese.
Yeah.
There's a really lovely use of the pottery going on here as well, again highlighting in that sense, in a slightly passive way, that these people had pottery. They weren't just sort of bashing things with rocks to to make food and whatever. So perhaps actually maybe yet again I have to sort of I have to come to the middle ground and say fair enough, okay, You know,
I
there is some
agree
good
with you.
stuff
I
there.
mean, it's a very nicely done. The graphic that they've issued to the media, that most of the media have carried. Sorry, English Heritage. This is. It's a very neat piece of work. It encapsulates the whole, as you say, the whole argument about the place of food in that culture. And how it was prepared and how it was stored, and how, just the sheer cross section of what's there. And then there are implied questions. And I mean, you mentioned the use of dairy products and so on, and there is the argument again that this is where the Western tolerance of lactose comes into our genetic makeup. Whereas in Southeast Asia, for example, that doesn't happen, and there's a built-in lactose intolerance. So there are some very, very interesting texts and conversations to be had just sensed on that. The other thing as well is, I think, and it's certainly something I've used in work in schools. I've done workshops in schools where part of the workshop has been sampling the kinds of foods that people, say, for example, in the Roman period or in the prehistoric period, would have eaten. And the idea of coming together to share food is so fundamental to all of us, whether it's in a family context or a social context or a religious context. It's an immediate hook to bring people in and start to look at the kind of questions we're talking about now. So actually, I think in terms of the exhibition, absolutely right to mount it and to try and bring actually the latest research in front of a general public in a palatable way. So we've had some fun. Again, we've had some fun with it. But I think there's a serious point and a quite valid point too.
Yeah, and it's an aspect. It's definitely an aspect of history which tends to be ignored actually throughout all of the different periods that were looked at, in particularly in the school curriculum. Yeah, people don't really tend to think about food or music or childhood and this kind of thing. So actually, yeah, okay, fair enough. I'll come back down off my horse just for a bit. But I would just love to see a little bit more variety when it comes to writing about this stuff. And I suppose one final note: I'm a little bit disappointed by, for example, the opening lines of this article. It says Britain's Stone Age ancestors possessed some unexpected talents. Ironically, though, we're talking about a Bronze Age monument. But anyway, scientists have discovered, on top of their prowess in constructing great monoliths such as Stonehenge,
which isn't a monolith, of course.
Yes, exactly, because Stonehenge isn't a monolith. It is a multilith. They were also adept at staging first-rate parties. There's an awful lot that can be said there about projecting elements of nationalism back into the past. Britons, prowess, parties. But anyway, we could, just let's leave it at the food and move on.
You know what, Mark? I think in some form or another, we'll be coming back to this at some point, won't we?
Yeah. Eventually, I'll just be wearing some sort of Stonehenge crown. Just sort of, it'll be my judgment hammer. No, ban. Okay, moving on. Let's move on.